Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. In this episode, I'm going to explain to you about party wall awards, because they are actually something that regularly get brought up in the weekly Q&A sessions that I have with my community members, because there is a little bit of uncertainty around them. And, it's definitely not something we want to be getting wrong. So I'll explain a little bit more about the Act under which party wall awards are placed. I'll talk to you about when they apply, how you serve notice, ultimately how you can keep the cost of party walls down, or the party wall notices, how you can keep those costs down, some things to look out for, and then ultimately what happens if you don't, or what could happen if you start without actually getting an award in place in the first instance. So, the Party Wall Act, in fact, it's the full name is Party Wall Etc. Act 1996. I don't know what the etc. deals with. They obviously swept in a few other little bits and pieces, but we're talking about an act that's been around since 1996. So it's very, very well established. And the key thing about the Act is it doesn't actually preclude you from doing any of the work that I'm going to talk about. And it also doesn't allow your neighbour to stop any of those works that you're proposing to do. So that's really, really significant, because unfortunately you're going to meet neighbours of your properties that believe they can use the Party Wall Act as a reason to stop you doing your work. And of course, where I come across that frequently in property investing circles is with investors that have got planning permission perhaps for something controversial next door. And the neighbours think, well, that's it, we can stop them actually doing the work by refusing to agree to a Party Wall award. Well, that is dealt with within the Act, and it's clear that this is not a grounds to be able to stop the work. If you Google for the Act, there's actually a really good government a fact sheet, so a guidance document. It's not that difficult to read and understand. There's obviously a lot in it. I'm going to cut through just to the basics in this episode, but there is, the information is out there and is available. The idea is that the Act was put in place to ensure that there was a process that two neighbours could follow if there was work that fell under the Act. And the work that falls under the Act is any work you do, well, any significant work that you do to the party wall. So if you have to do major refurbishments, major repairs to the party wall that is attached to your neighbour's house, or indeed is their boundary wall, because that could also fall under the Act. But any work you do to the party wall, also any work you do in the party wall. So if you cut a pocket into the party wall, say to put a piece of steel into it to hold up an extension or a loft conversion, then that also applies. The Act also applies if you're doing work on the party wall line. So for instance, perhaps you're taking down a fence and you're going to replace that with a new wall that is the wall of perhaps an extension that you're building. And then the final one where we come across this on a regular basis is if we are excavating within 3 meters of the neighbour's building, or possibly in some circumstances 6 meters within from the neighbour's building. So generally in residential properties, it's 3 meters from the neighbour's building. Where you need to be a little bit more cautious is if the neighbour's building has got a significant basement, because if it's got a significant basement, then that 3 meters becomes 6 meters. Less likely to have any impact in a residential situation, but could very easily have an impact in commercial, and also in streets where every single building's different because you don't necessarily know what the neighbour's got. Within the Act, it specifically says that minor works are excluded, or minor works to the party wall are excluded. So, for instance, you can pack off the plaster on your side and replaster. You can fix fittings, if shelves and cabinets can be fitted to the party wall without notifying the neighbour. You can cut little pockets to put in electric sockets and things like that. But anything much more than that will fall under the Act. But significantly, if you're doing any work that you think might have the a cause or of affecting the neighbour's wall on their side of the same wall, then really um, you should be serving a party wall notice on your neighbour. So pretty straightforward. On work on the wall, work in the wall, work to the wall, and generally 3 meters, excavating 3 meters from the neighbour's building. So generally, all extensions, unless you're in a very in a street where it's well spread out, most extensions need a party wall notice because we frequently build right up to the party wall line. We're often working on semi-detached houses, and so we're easily within 3 meters. Be careful of the 3 meter rule on both sides of the property. Look on both sides. You could be close to 3 meters from the neighbour's building. We're not talking about the neighbour's wall here, a garden wall or anything. We're talking about the building at this point. But also be careful to the rear as well. Just have a look and see what is at the rear of the property, and particularly if there's likely to be a basement, then consider whether you need to serve notice for 6 meters. The other common jobs that we do where we're almost certainly going to need a party wall award in place. Loft conversions almost certainly need to be under a party wall award because there's generally some support taken from the party wall. Not always, but generally there is. We also end up frequently building the dormer right the way up to and onto the party wall line, which is absolutely fine. But of course, that's a shared wall there, so we need to give notice there. So loft conversions frequently fall under it, and chimneys as well can be the other common thing. So taking down structural walls on the party wall line can very easily lead to a party wall award as well. There are obviously other things. I did a party wall award, not for anything that we were building actually. I was working for a developer, we'd got planning permission to develop a piece of land to the rear of some properties. This piece of land had been there for a long time. It had a trackway that was going to become the driveway in due course up to this property. It was quite a narrow track, and we were taking not massive vehicles up there, but we were taking vans and things up that track. And we were a little concerned that we were very, very close to the neighbour's property. And we were concerned that there was an outside chance that we might just knock a gutter or knock a pipe, or the wing mirror would scrape along the wall or something like that. So we actually put a party wall award in place with that neighbour there, really to demonstrate to them that we were doing our best to make sure that there was no impact on their building. But if there was actually, if we did cause some damage, it was dealt with properly, and we were proper developers that were going to come back and repair it if that was the case. I don't think we ever actually had a problem in the end. I don't recall having a problem on that particular property. So just be a little bit more aware that there are times where you may need a party wall award beyond the basic four items, but most of the time those are the reasons that for a party wall award being needed. So, how do you serve a party wall notice? The first thing to say is it can be very, very simple and it can be done effectively for free. So that is a good place to start from, aiming to do it the simple way and the free way. Now, if you go on to the government website, the guidance notes that I was talking about, you will find some prescribed letters that you can write, or you can literally copy and paste and send them to your neighbour. So at the very basic level, you need to notify that your neighbour that you are carrying out work. You give them a very, very brief overview of what you're doing: construction of a new extension, converting the loft. Yeah, keep it very, very simple and effectively ask them to sign the letter to confirm that you've had the conversation. And as I say, if you go to the website, you'll find that prescribed letter on there. I make a tiny little amendment to that letter. I'll explain that shortly. But you give that to your neighbour, or you send that to your neighbour or neighbours, because there could be more than one on some of your projects. And you have the conversation with them that you're doing some work, and you ask them to confirm that that they are aware that you're doing the work. And the second thing you do is you then agree with the neighbours a good time before the works actually start to do a survey of the parts of their property that might be affected by the work. And we do that as a photographic survey. So we've told the neighbours we're going to do the work. The neighbours have signed to confirm that they've had the conversation with us. And now we've got some photos which you can share through a sharing system online with the neighbour, or you could print them all out and both have copies of those photographs. And the whole thing here is, if in doing your work you cause some damage to your neighbour's building, then it's evident from the photos. The photos don't show a crack on the wall. You do your work, there's a crack opened up. The likelihood is it's something that you did that caused that crack. Therefore, there's no argument that it was caused by your work. It occurred in the duration of the works being carried out. So you can send a plaster around there, patch it all up, paint it as necessary, and the neighbour has now got their property back at the status, from a repair position back to the status it was. I say that cautiously, because if you have to repaint the wall, that might well mean that wall is now in better condition than the rest of the walls. You're not obliged to do any more than just put the property back in the condition it was. Now, let me just reassure you here, relating to party wall works, that in all of my nigh on 40 years working in construction, although I've been involved with lots of projects that have actually had party walls in place, there are very, very few where we have actually needed to go into the neighbour's property and carry out repairs. So the likelihood of this actually going wrong, particularly in residential situations, the smaller, simpler projects that we're doing as property investors, the likelihood of you needing to do anything with your neighbour is pretty low. I'll just tell you two stories. The worst party wall award we had, or the worst impact of a party wall award I was involved with, the structural steel company managed to have a problem putting the structural steel into a party wall, and actually rammed it right the way through the wall and came out in the neighbour's bathroom. That was one of the worst ones. Fortunately, the neighbour wasn't in the bath at the time, and we had a hole all the way through. We had damage to the bath, and so significant other things in there. So that was the extreme. That was one of the worst ones I've ever had. Now, that would have obviously cost probably £1,500 or so to put right, depending on the extent of the damage to the bath. It wouldn't have been £1,500 when that occurred, because that was a long, long time ago now. So it would have been a cost, 1,500, £2,000 or so, if we did that, if we had that issue today. You could obviously agree with your builder that it was their fault and hopefully they'd pay for it. But if not, it might be something you have to pay for. Let's jumping in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community, and I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. Obviously, within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording, and of course, a lot of things are very generic. So, what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20 and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. I look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast. The most recent party wall notice I got involved with, not the most recent party wall notice, but the most recent notice I had from a neighbour relating to a party wall award. I'd been working with a client, I was managing a project on their behalf to convert, actually it was converting a pub into an HMO. And we'd done a party wall award with the neighbour. We weren't really doing any work on or to the party wall, but the neighbour had kind of caused problems all along. So I agreed with my client that it was probably just right that we spoke to the neighbour about what we were doing, and we took photos of her little cottage that was attached to this pub. Now, the cottage itself was not in good condition at all. It already showed signs of an element of movement, and lack of maintenance. It had tenants in it, so it really wasn't in the best shape, unfortunately. I took survey photos of the wall in question. We did the work next door, converted the whole thing into an HMO. The neighbour contacted me and said, "Oh, the wall in the kitchen is really badly damaged. It's covered in cracks, all as a result of your work." We were pretty certain it wasn't, because we were pretty certain that we didn't even really need a party wall award in the first place. We'd done it more as a PR exercise. I went into the neighbour's property and there were cracks in the kitchen wall. And when I looked at the photos, they were pretty much the cracks that were in the photos taken, 8 months earlier on or so. There was actually a tenant in the property next door, so they were independent of the owner of the property. So we had a little bit of a chat, and the neighbouring tenant said they didn't believe that there was any issues with the work that had gone on next door, but they had one of these landlords who wanted to cause problems. In the end, I spoke to my client about this, and my client said, "Do you know, I can't even be bothered with this. Why don't we just send a painter around to fill the cracks and paint the wall in the kitchen?" Bearing in mind the wall already had a lot of kitchen units all over it and tiling and other bits and pieces. The painter was in there for half a day, filling the cracks and painting the wall, charged something like £150. Was it legitimate? Possibly not. But my client's view was, for £150, I'm not going to fall out with my neighbour. So you can use these to, build a bonding and build a relationship with your neighbour. So at grassroots level, you won't, even though you need to follow this process, you won't have lots of projects that come back with issues against the party wall award. And if you can, you need to give the notice to your neighbours, keep on their side, take photos, record all the details, pop round and see them afterwards. Maybe give them a box of chocolates if you need to, if that smooths it along, a bottle of wine, something like that, if that smooths it along. And in most cases, everyone is absolutely happy. The challenge is there will be some projects where that is not the case. So whilst I've given you the method of keeping the cost down, unfortunately, in some cases, that won't actually work. And that's unfortunately where the cost could easily start to escalate and could escalate very, very quickly. It will come to a final point. It's not an unlimited cost, but it could massively increase and then more than double very quickly. And I'll explain that to you now. Now, I did say that one of the modifications I make to the standard recommended letter is that there is a line item on the bottom of the letter that says, if you are not in agreement with this application, you can appoint, or we can, because it's a joint appoint, we can appoint an independent party wall surveyor. Now, I take that out of the letters because I don't really want to encourage them. I don't want to encourage the neighbours to appoint an independent surveyor because that is where cost starts to mount up. And even though the neighbour can say to you, yes, I want us to have an independent surveyor, the neighbour is not obliged to pay anything towards that independent surveyor. So it's you that's got to pay 100% of the fee for that surveyor, which in simple situations is probably just below £1,000 still, but in some areas is definitely going to creep over £1,000 now. So if you can't pop round to the neighbours and agree all of this amicably at a cost that probably is nothing or maybe a box of chocolates, you are going to have to appoint an independent surveyor. And an independent surveyor is going to charge you somewhere around about £1,000 for this process. And that could easily be £1,000 for every party wall award they need to do. So if you've got a property on both sides and you need to do two party walls, you might get a little bit of saving for doing two, but it's effectively double the cost. So this is why I encourage everyone to get on well with the neighbours and manage it through with the neighbours. Now, so level one is pop round, see the neighbour. Level two is appoint an independent party wall surveyor to effectively sit between you and your neighbour to put together the standard prescribed documents, which is not really anything more than a record of the current condition. There's obviously some signatures and bits needed in there just to confirm the neighbours are aware that you're doing the work, but they will obviously have to charge you for putting together that party wall award. So that's level two, fees starting around about £1,000 per party wall that is affected, or per neighbour that is going to be or likely to be affected by the work. Now, your neighbour actually does have the right to request their own party wall surveyor. So at this point, you've now got a party wall surveyor acting on behalf of you, and the neighbour's got a party wall surveyor independently acting on their behalf. And guess who has to pay for the neighbour's party wall surveyor? Yes, that's you as well, because it's you doing the work. So if you can agree amicably, that's brilliant. If you agree to use a joint party wall surveyor, that might be £1,000. If the neighbour then says, no, I want to appoint my own party wall surveyor, then that party wall surveyor, who would normally be £1,000 if pricing competitively, is now getting a price at £1,200 or £1,500 because they know that the neighbour's paying, and it's all a little bit unreasonable, really. So you can suddenly find that something that could easily be done for no cost, or the cost of a box of chocolates or a bottle of wine, could very easily turn into several £1,000s if you're not careful and if you don't go in, nice and softly and calmly with your neighbour. There is in the Act a process to follow if the neighbour refuses to give access or refuses to sign. They're not actually able to do that under the Act, as I explained at the start of this episode. But there is a process that needs to be followed there, and you will need a party wall surveyor for that. So if your neighbour doesn't agree to anything, you've got to get a party wall surveyor in place to look after you. So some things to watch out for as far as your adjoining properties go. So first of all, be careful when the property next door has a tenant living in it, because the tenant is not the person that owns the property and is therefore not the person that can sign to give approval to do any work. So you do need to be mindful of that. You also need to be mindful that, so from that, you obviously need to track down the landlord, which the tenant may well be able to give you the details for. But if that landlord happens to be a housing association, the local authority, or a significant corporate body, you might just as well go straight for the party wall surveyor option, because all of them, as soon as you write to those kinds of bodies, you will just end up in their legal department, and the legal department will say, we need a party wall surveyor. So you might as well start with a party wall surveyor in the first place. And if you can find this information out, you can obviously factor in the right cost into your initial appraisal for the project. So do be mindful of who owns next door. Now, also be mindful that the property next door could have multiple owners. Let's say that next door is a block of flats and you're doing work to a 3-story building, and as a result, there's 3 flats next door. So if those flats have been sold on long leases, so these are the 999 type leases, then those in each of those individual long lease holders could well be affected by your work. So you could have multiple properties in there. But significantly, the freeholder for the block of flats also needs to be notified. So a block of 3 flats, you could very easily be raising 4 party wall notices. And the cost of those, you might get a bit of a saving if you go to a party wall surveyor. But if you need a party wall surveyor there, you're probably going to spend £3,000 plus to get those in place. And if any of those want their own independent surveyor, then add on the cost for that as well. So what you can see here is very quickly the costs can escalate if you can't keep this at a manageable at a manageable level, and if we can't keep it amicable with our neighbours. Now, you also need to consider here that there is a time frame needed to get all of this in place. If you're on good terms with your neighbour, you could pop round tomorrow afternoon, agree the whole thing, and you could start work in 2 days' time. It could be very, very easy. But in turn, if the neighbour is remote from the property, if they've got a legal department and everything needs to go through party wall process, that could easily take a month. And if you go to your neighbour and they reject it and they cause problems and they don't respond, and then a party wall surveyor has to get involved, that can very easily get towards 2 months. So the recommendations within the Act is that you actually give 2 months notice. So you start the process 2 months before. My advice is you don't actually take the photos until a few days before the works are going to start. So you would agree with your neighbour that you're going to carry out these works. They're going to start in the next, next 6 to 8 weeks or so. Uh, but maybe earlier. You can say you can start earlier, um, and they give you the notice. You get everything sorted out, and then you can be off and running ahead of 2 months. So 2 months is the recommended, but you could start earlier if everything falls into place. But it doesn't. But the thing to know is you could give 2 months notice with a view that you're not going to start the work for 2 months. You've got a builder lined up. They're coming in 2 months' time. Don't do the photographic record until the week before the builder's going to start. Otherwise, there is a minor chance that further damages get caused by the homeowner before you actually start the work, and then you get caught out and you're paying for repairs that perhaps are nothing to do with your project. So give yourself 2 months to get this process in place. Um, if you start to get a sniff that the neighbour is not going to be particularly open to discussing this with you, or the neighbour is hard to come to find because it's not the person living at the property, or perhaps it's an empty property, or perhaps it's a commercial property, then you almost certainly might as well go straight for the route of appointing party wall surveyor, and keep your fingers crossed that the neighbour doesn't actually insist on getting their own independent party wall surveyor. Unfortunately, there are party wall surveyors that trawl through the planning portal and will write to the neighbours of properties where planning is being sought, telling them that they are entitled to an independent party wall surveyor. So you will find in some cases that the neighbours have already got a letter and already been told to watch out for this notice coming in from you. And ultimately, these are just, in many ways, ambulance chasers. These are just surveyors that are looking for work. Generally, the bona fide RICS surveyors wouldn't really operate in that way. They generally wouldn't be ambulance chasing, but you will find some out there, and you will find some surveyors that aren't RICS would be looking for work this way. You don't need to be an RICS qualified member to do a party wall award. It is just about following a process. Which is why you can actually do this yourself. The key thing is that, as with everything, if you're not quite sure, then do please take some advice. Don't leave it and hope it goes away, and don't get it wrong. If you get it wrong and you start the work without having an award in place, interestingly, there's nothing in the Act that says what the remedy is for your neighbour. But ultimately, if your neighbour believes that the work you're carrying out could be jeopardising their building, they can go via a solicitor and get an injunction served on you to stop the works that you're doing whilst the whole thing is sorted out. And that they can get an injunction served within about 48 hours or so, and they can and then you've got to go through this whole process. Meanwhile, your builder's on site twiddling his thumbs. So that will cost you more in the longer term. So definitely don't start without an award. If in doubt, get some advice. If in doubt, as my client who did the pub conversion, just get the award in place. It's not a bad thing, and sometimes you'll know it's worth keeping on side with the neighbours to your property. So hopefully that gives you an overview of party wall awards. There's a little bit of detail in there. There's a few things to take on board, and a lot of you will need a party wall award somewhere along the way in your in the projects that you're actually doing. So fingers crossed everything goes well for you, everything goes smoothly. As I say, most projects I've got involved with where we've had a party wall in place, We have not had to do any major works to the neighbours. We've not had any significant issues getting them in place, but I am aware of some properties in city centres where we've served probably up to 6 or 7 party wall notices on various parties. So be aware of the cost of those, and if you can, factor them in at an early stage when you're first putting together the stacking of your deals. So all the best with your party wall awards, and do please, as ever, get in touch if there's anything I can help you with respect to party wall awards, or indeed anything else that I talk about on these podcasts.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.